how many other kind of situations like Sarah's are you seeing, are you finding?
Well, Pete, good morning, and quite a few, unfortunately, because the Premier has turned the borders into a political weapon, and it's just unacceptable. Look, the case of Sarah is just so tragic and so sad, and I've been talking to Sarah, and look, the poor girl, and like the Prime Minister said, seeing those images yesterday is just a really sad day for Queensland. But what I would say, Pete, is there are so many of these cases that are popping up, and the Premier needs to show some compassion, some consistency and common sense when it comes to these border exemptions. You can't have one rule for one.
Sorry, yeah, I was just about to say, I mean, the Prime Minister, he's intervened a few times, Deb. There's a few different instances. Parents separated from a newborn son for days, that's one instance. Another being a woman seeking follow-up appointments for breast cancer surgery. And the third one, a man who tried to see his mum before she died. I mean, it goes to show that the Prime Minister is powerless here.
Well, look, it is so disappointing that the Premier, as the leader of the state, is refusing to make the decisions. The buck stops with her, and to think that the Prime Minister had to intervene or try to intervene to the Premier, and yet the Premier being accused of bullying, she is not the victim here. The victims are the people who were caught up in her political warfare over the borders. And it's just unacceptable. Now, I've been talking to so many people. There's Simon, who is comes from a part in an area in New South Wales that hasn't had COVID for a long period of time. He just wants to get over the border to come to his mum's funeral as well. It's a very similar story, except he just has resigned himself that he won't be able to do it. It is just unacceptable that the Premier of Queensland is passing the buck on these tragic stories. And look, poor Sarah has been, cast into the media spotlight, which she didn't want, but she did it because she's trying to get a message across that she just wanted to see her dad on his last day on this earth.
Deb,
bloody sad.
You've changed your position a few times when it comes to borders. What would you do on this instance?
Well, first of all, Peter, I disagree with what I've been always saying. I've been saying the borders cannot be set and forget. It's got to be based on medical advice. Now, the Premier closed the borders, and she kept them closed originally without any medical advice. Now, the medical advice did change because of the outbreak in Victoria, and so I'm saying we do need strong border controls, but we also need common sense, consistency and a bit of compassion. When you've got one rule for the rich here in Queensland, but another rule for other people, well then I say enough's enough, and that is not good enough. We need consistency. Why should 400 AFL executives, Tom Hanks, and according to the Premier's own Chief Health Officer saying if someone brings money into this state, they're allowed an exemption, but yet a young family is not allowed to see their dying dad, well, then the system is broken and needs fixing.
So would you have Tom Hanks, stay at a hotel in Brisbane?
Well, I don't even understand what the circumstances are around Tom Hanks getting back in. When today it's been reported there's a young Queensland girl stuck in London that can't even get on the list to get back into the country. I can understand her angst as to why celebrities get priority flights in. I'm not even sure what Tom Hanks is doing here. The Premier hasn't made that clear. The Premier's certainly not told Queenslanders how much it cost Queensland taxpayers to bring Tom Hanks back into the country. Look, we all love Tom Hanks. This isn't about him. What this is about is how about we have some consistency in decision making. And at the end of the day, I'll keep saying this, the buck stops with the Premier. She's elected. She is elected to lead, and lead she's failing to do. The
Premier said yesterday that it wasn't her decision. It's essentially Jeanette Young's decision to make. It's her call to make. Has she been given too much power?
Well, the Premier is completely wrong in that assumption. The Premier is the Premier of the state. She has been elected. She was more than happy to stand up and talk every morning about, keeping Queenslanders safe by her strong border closures. But yet when it all goes to pot, she blames the Chief Health Officer. Look, it's the Premier's job to listen and have some compassion, and the Premier has failed to do that. Now, when someone like the Prime Minister reaches out to the Premier, appeals to her compassionate side, and then gets accused of bullying, well, I'm with the rest of Queensland when they are rightfully saying, come on, Premier, you're not the victim here. The victim are the people that are being hardly done by you not being able to make a decision.
But it seems like the rest of Queensland is folding in behind Annastacia Palaszczuk, though, because the polls that I'm looking at suggest that some 80% of respondents do support what Annastacia Palaszczuk is doing.
Well, look, we all support strong border measures, but it's got to be done with consistency, compassion and common sense, Pete. And at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure on the 31st of October, Sarah won't be worrying about who the hell the next Premier of Queensland is. She's still going to be in a world of pain because she was unable to attend her dad's funeral.
So if you win the election this year, what do you do if Jeanette Young is there and she advises you to keep the border shut?
Well, Pete, it's got to be all about the updated medical advice. I've always said border controls can't be set and forget. But I'll tell you exactly this. If I'm elected as Premier, the buck stops with me. I will not fob off the decision-making around a mistake that has happened around a funeral exemption to a bureaucrat. What it has to be done, the buck stops with whomever is elected, and I'm happy to give you that commitment here today.